Take it away, Sarah.
All right. Hello to everybody. It's been really neat to see where everybody's joining us from. Like I just saw one from South Dakota. So this is really vast. And we all have to realize that we're all coming from a different place. Like maybe winter snuck up on you and there's some things you didn't get to in the fall. Or maybe you were way better than I am most of the time and you were on it and you were already gearing to go and everything's in perfect condition. So if you're that person, that is phenomenal. And I want to be like you. And like I said, this is also just my take on how to wake up the garden. And it's kind of going to touch on a couple things that is a very skimmed over because each one of these things could probably become an hour discussion on its own. And we're just kind of getting your brain ready to go for the gardening season. That's just me, Sarah Llewellyn. I'm here in Allegany County. A lot of people forget about us out here. I'm not Garrett. I'm the county right before. So as you're flying through to go to the lake, that's us. You go right through our county. Maybe you've been at Rocky Gap before. So that's how most people know us, or Frostburg. They go to Frostburg State University. And I'm located here in Cumberland, Maryland. I always have to post the Injustice for All poster because I want everybody to know that everybody is invited to our programs. We want everybody to come and we want everybody to be able to enjoy the programs. So my goal is for everybody to feel welcome. All right, so let's hop into it. So our goal is to really go over a ton of things and you could do on a beautiful day like today. It's 54 degrees here. I might need to go home and do some of this after work today. So assessing our winter damage. It's been really cold. It's been a pretty rough winter, especially up here in the western part of Maryland. So today would be a great day to get out in that garden and or even out in your landscape and look for anything that could have been damaged over the winter. If it's severely damaged, it might be a good time to go ahead and trim and get rid of those broken branches. And also look at your mulch levels and if you're going to need to replace some of that. It's easy to look at it in the fall and be like, oh, everything looks good. And then it settles in the winter and you're like, oh, there's a lot of bare spots or the wind swept through. I don't know if it's been as windy everywhere else as it's been here. I feel like it was the windiest place ever this whole winter. So I noticed in my landscaping and where I have some native plants that a lot of my mulch is no longer there. So I definitely need to assess that and definitely replenish it. And I've noticed if you are on top of it and you get your orders and you get your supplies early, then it's not as much of a mad rush and the garden centers aren't as busy. Or maybe if you have a delivery service, it's not quite as busy. So that's one great thing to get on top of it before it becomes the busy season. And now cleaning up the garden, everybody's favorite job, right? Everybody loves cleaning up their garden. So we all know the best time to do this was in the fall. But we also know that fall ends very abruptly and winter begins. And sometimes we didn't get to all of the things that we wanted to get to before, the winter weather crept in and you kind of got stuck inside. However, on a beautiful day like today, it'd be a great idea to go out there and really assess your weed situation. Like how many weeds are out there? If your ground's not frozen, it'd be a great time now and next month into April, start getting rid of those weeds, removing them before they have a complex root system. It's going to be a little bit easier, especially if the soil's a little more moist. It really allows it to get, especially a taproot out a little bit easier. The second bullet's a little tricky. So like it's a mixed and complicated thought with cleaning up the garden. So in my pollinator garden, I'm really mindful of not cleaning up the leaves or some of the broken stems because there could be pollinators resting in there. It could be, our future butterfly and moth population there in there. So I'm mindful of that, especially in a pollinator garden. But when it comes to like, let's say it was some old tomato plants or maybe something that wasn't in the best shape last year and it needs to be taken out, I would take that out sooner than later. So just be mindful if it's like a large group of like maybe leaves that grew into a certain part of your yard or into your garden, that could potentially be a habitat for some of our pollinators. So if it's not bothering you, if it's not causing an issue, I would leave it. But if it's an old plant that maybe it even had like a disease, like I always think of tomatoes, sometimes those plants get left in there over the winter. It would be a really good time to rip those out. And like I said, the third bullet, clean up any leftover vegetable plants from the previous year. And it would also be a good idea for you to remember where those plants were. If you didn't make a map of last year, I always try to make a nice map. Now, whether or not a plant the same as the map, that sometimes is tricky, just so you can get those old plants out of there and be mindful of what you're planting in that same space. And then cleaning the garden tools and staking materials, especially if you didn't do that last year. I typically am so busy cleaning up my garden because I have a large garden that I hold off on cleaning things until this spring. And if this is like, oh, hold on, I don't think I've cleaned my things before, this would be a great time to start really thinking about like, keeping everything nice and tidy, and it's going to keep those diseases and some of the pests away. And I believe the next slide goes over that a little bit more. Yeah, cleaning tools. Before in the fall is the best time to clean up our tools. We all know that we don't get around to that. So if you didn't, it's okay. You still want to clean them up before you use them in the
Clearly.
spring. All right, in the spring, if you use them, you don't want to clean that, or in the spring, you use them if you don't clean them in the fall. So you definitely want to make sure you clean them up, especially I'm thinking pruners, maybe some of our trowels, our shovels, broad forks, anything that really got exposed to the soil and anything that could be in it. And then after you use your tools in another garden site, so I'm assuming there's probably some master gardeners in here, and you help out at maybe some community gardens, maybe at your extension office if you have a demo garden. Just be mindful that you don't really always know what you're coming in contact with. It's a really good idea to always be making sure that you're cleaning it off. And that's as easy as just using like a watered down bleach solution or whatever. I've even seen like alcohol solutions. And that one website on the bottom, it does a really good job of going over some different things that you can use because, we still want to make sure that our tools are in good shape, but we want to make sure that we're not going to promote rust or promote them to pit or have any extra issues. Because if you're putting good money into your tools, you want to make sure they're not passing along disease and that they are nice and clean. Soil preparation. Oh, this is the one. This is where everybody calls and they're like, I want to make a new garden area. What do I do? And the first thing we always say is soil testing. The University of Maryland gives a lot of different places. We don't have soil testing, but I personally have gone through Penn State before, and producers use all different kinds of soil tests. Whatever soil test you decide to use, try to continue using that one because sometimes they can use different agents, different buffers, and it can give you different results. So whatever company you go with or whatever you decide to use, if you stick with them every 3 years, it's going to give you similar results. And you want to keep those test results on hand so you can monitor them. The one thing I did that I really liked was I got it emailed to me. So I just have that in a saved email and I can just go over into my saved email and pull that up and see what it looked like last year and continue with this year. You might want to test more often. So one of our farmers, she gets her test every 3 years, but she noticed that her strawberries were not doing well. Like it's just a small part of her garden, and she was frustrated because, it's just a small part. So keep in mind, if you have a part of your garden that I call like the problem part, you don't really know. Maybe it's just a drier part of the garden, or maybe the soil structure seems different. It's okay to just get that smaller part of the garden tested instead of doing the entire thing. So just keep that in mind if you have like an area that you just think is not doing as well as the rest of the garden. Maybe you should have a soil test for just that part. That could be a really good idea. Um, Amending the soil in the spring is okay. Obviously, fall was the best time, but remember, it's okay. It'll still have a little bit of time to break down and make its way into your soil and make it a healthier soil for your plants. Same goes with pH. Better in the fall, but it's okay. You can still do it. You can still amend your pH, and that's really important. If you're going to be needing a soil test, sooner the better. Just make sure if your ground's frozen, you're not going to be able to get into it. So that's obvious. But also make sure it's not super soggy, just because that can be a pain for you to take the soil sample. Um, we could spend hours talking about soil samples, but the funniest way I've ever had it explained to me, if you've never done a soil sample for sending in for your results, is to just kind of stagger around in your garden and just take little tiny clumps from a whole bunch of different places and then mix them up in a bucket and send them in. I think it's like a cup is how much they need at the soil testing place. So you remember, just move around, and maybe if there is a really rough place in your garden, you might not even want to include them in your soil sample for the rest of your garden, because that could just kind of mess up your results. So be mindful of that. You might want to, if you have a weird part of your garden that doesn't do well, and the rest, you could do two separate soil samples. You'd have to pay for two separate soil samples, but it might give you better information to help you make the best choices for your garden. And also, you could start adding some compost and some different amendments to your garden. All right, so this is for my people that enjoy having potted plants. And you're like, what do I do with that potting soil? Like, can I use it year to year? Do I have to throw it out? And typically you can use it, but you're going to have to do some things first. First of all, you want to think back of what was in it. If the plant that was in it was diseased, filled with weeds, was just brimming with insects that aren't good guys, maybe that you need to ditch that. I would. Like, is it worth your time? However, if you had plants in it, it didn't have any disease, didn't have insect issues, wasn't filled with weeds, you can totally use that, but you're going to need to amend it because like the fertilizer or the plant food that was in it was only made for about 6 months. So the food in that potting soil is pretty much depleted. Some people will just add a slow release, like a granular fertilizer to it, and add a little bit more into the soil and kind of dump it out, mix it all together, take out any extra, root systems or anything that's in there and reuse it. And others will just, especially if it's a large container, will just go ahead and remove the top 6 inches and add in new to there. It really depends on what you're doing and whether or not you want to be able to pick it up. Maybe it's a large pot and you can't pick it up. So you can decide what's best for you. But just remember, if it was a diseased plant in there, if it had showed signs of, a virus or a bacteria, or maybe it was just completely infested with a pest, you probably want to just go ahead and get rid of that. But I have successfully reused my potting soil before by amending it properly. All right, pruning, like I said, this could be a whole class on its own. We could spend I think there is a pruning workshop today of all days with a different university. I think it was Ohio, and it is literally an all-day event because we have we can have a single leader, we can have an open type of structure with our trees, but if just keeping it super basic, the most important is the three Ds, and that's removing any branches that are dead, diseased, or damaged. So if you just are like, I don't know where to start, that is the perfect place to start. And then over to the right, this is the picture from, I think it's it's from our Master Gardener book. And if you look at it, you can see some different tree branches that they would totally get rid of. Obviously, crowded and diseased and crossing branches, and even look at those girdling roots, the suckers and the water sprouts. Just really go out and look at it and think to yourself, I can start here, and as I get going, I can learn a little bit more. Some people just take a step back and they're too afraid to even prune, but everybody starts somewhere, and the worst thing you can do is just walk away and be like, let's let it happen on its own and see what happens, especially with your fruit trees. They definitely need some attention throughout the years. And if you look at the bottom over here, we just have the 3 Ds: dead, diseased, damaged, and it just kind of goes over what to look for. Obviously dead, it's brown. If you scrape at it, there's nothing green under there. It is just completely dead. Diseased, you're going to look for like those spots and those discolorations, and maybe it has like a weird growth on it. Remember, if it's diseased, you want to get that away from the tree and bag it up, get rid of it. You don't want it to be around, because if you just let it lay on the ground and it's diseased, you could potentially be spreading that to other trees, especially if you have multiple trees of the same species. And then damaged, any that are broken, cracked. Those are the easy ones to see. Most people know to start there. Like if it's damaged, it obviously shouldn't be a part of the plant anymore. So it's easy to get rid of those. And like I said, we could spend hours on hours talking about pruning. That's definitely something that if you get into, like you want to really jump off the high dive and learn a lot about it, absolutely do some classes, and it would be a wonderful thing for lots of other people to learn. All right, one thing that would be a great idea for today too is just looking around at your garden structures. We have here at the demo garden in Allegany County the chunkiest groundhog I've ever seen in my life, and he's so chunky because he is really good at getting through our fence. And he was a pest. I think he ate 2 pumpkins and a lot of tomatoes. So although we did quick repairs last year to try to keep him out, this year we're going to have to really up our game and make some holes in the fences a lot more sturdy, because we have the deer fence, but it's a polymer. It's like the plastic, so I got to put up some metal fencing to keep that big guy out of there. But if you don't even have a fence, first of all, good for you. Like I would love to not have to have a fence, but we have a lot of deer here. But it's also a great time to look at those raised beds if you're a raised bed grower. really look into it because sometimes rotted boards are good at hiding themselves until you plant it out and then you notice like one side's kind of blown out of it and then you got soil trying to sneak around. So it might need more support. You might need to add some extra screws, or worst case scenario, you might need to rebuild a little bit of it. But this is the time to do it instead of waiting till you're planting it and then trying to go back and add support with plants inside of it. Trellises, same thing goes with trellises. I do a lot of the cattle panel arch trellises. They don't typically need any repairs. But one thing that I always have to do with my trellises is make sure that I go in and scrub them down because I grow like beans and vining plants on them. And while I pull the plants down at the end of the season, those the tendrils do a great job of wrapping themselves all over everything. So I try to go in and get all those little tiny pieces off and scrub it down or at least hose it down a little bit so that I'm not allowing, spores and disease to continue to grow on those trellises. And if you have a cool trellis like this one, obviously, if there's any screws or any hardware, check that out, make sure that's good. Another thing that I'm really thinking about for my own personal garden this year is really revamping my irrigation system. I've had overhead waters like a sprinkler system for a long time. We all know that's not ideal because it does, cause more water to land on the leaves, which then cause more mildew and fungal issues. But that was my place to start, and we all have to start somewhere. So looking into a new system like a drip line or drip tape and really thinking about like how would you run them, type of pump that might be necessary to run them. Reading up, there's definitely some different things you can read through many different extensions about this type of watering. One of the producers that I work with, he has more flowers kind of in his area. It was like a little sprinkler, but it was like a drip line sprinkler system. And I thought it was really cool. And it worked very well considering it didn't rain here from like June until September. So it did a great job of advancing the plants and keeping them healthy. Lastly, if you wanted to install rain barrels, this would be a great time to be thinking about where you could put it. A lot of people wait until it's about time for you to really need to have access to water and then installing it, and then it'll decide to not rain for a while. So if you can think about where you're going to put it and let it start to get filled up now with the spring rains coming our way, then at least you'll have water that you can utilize whenever you're doing it. Because I'm guilty of the first time I had a rain barrel, I waited until summer and then it didn't rain for like a ridiculous amount of time and I kept waiting for this thing to get filled. So if you can think about that, that would be a really good idea. And one of the not so fun jobs, we drain our rain barrel obviously because we don't want to crack with the freezing over the winter. But it does get like a film or I don't know, like a slimy residue in there. And while it does dry out, I like to get in there and make sure I scrub it down or at least put something in there to kind of reduce all of that extra film and sediment and get sediment in the bottom. I have to rinse the sediment out. So this would be a good time to also be maintaining your rain barrels a little bit, noticing if there's any cracks or any other issues that you need to be dealing with. This is all making it sound like, spring's a tough time of the year, but remember, if you set yourself up for success, then it's going to make the summer go by so much easier and it's going to make your plants so much healthier. So, although it is work, this is the time to really be looking into what you can do to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. Planning and rotating crops. Well, if this is your first year, congratulations, you don't have to rotate anything, so you can just ignore that, but you still have to plan. And my number one advice, if we're talking vegetable gardening, is plant the things that you're going to eat. I mean, we don't eat a lot of cucumbers in our house. I don't need 5 cucumber plants. Maybe if I were making pickles, but I'm the only one that eats the pickles in my house too. So be mindful of what you're growing as if you're actually going to be able to utilize it. I mean, it's great to give away. That's wonderful. But in order for you to really enjoy what you're growing, pick things that you're going to actually want to eat and look at your space. You might want to have, a pumpkin for the fall. Fantastic. But if you have one raised bed and it's small, and that one pumpkin is going to take up the entire thing plus grow into your yard and become a hassle, it's not the best plant for the space. I mean, we could talk about vertical gardening with a trellis, but just be mindful of the amount of space that you have. It's okay to plant plants a little tighter than what the package says, but if it gets to the point where, they're all competing with each other, then You're just wasting your time, and that's not a good idea. I want you to be successful. Rotating your crops, and that doesn't mean like rotating every single crop. You need to be mindful of the family that they're in. So, keep squash plants away from other squash plants. So, yes, you might have grown zucchini there, but you're probably not going to want to grow a spaghetti squash in the exact same place, due to all of those wonderful squash bugs and squash vine borers and cucumber beetles. They just, if you keep showing them where they're going to find their food next year, then they're going to just build up in population. Um, Look at your location. Make sure it's a sunny location. Make sure it's well drained. We have a lot of clay soil here, so I always tell our growers here to be mindful of how that soil is draining. If it seems like a swamp, that's not going to change. Like just putting a garden there is not going to make it less swampy. Same goes with the sun. I just had someone that contacted me that wants to grow a little garden next to their building, but it gets zero sun. There's, I mean, maybe you could grow a little lettuce. It might do okay. But there's certain things that we can't change. We can't change how much light something gets, and we can't change how easy it is for the water to access it. So just be mindful of that. Know your zone, know your gardening season. Here in Cumberland, it's a 7A where I live. I live closer to Garrett County, so I'm in a 6B. I know how many days my gardening season is about, because remember, it's an approximation. Last year, I was able to plant early in May. Sometimes I can't plant some of my tender crops until almost June here. So just be mindful of what your gardening zone is. If you're not sure, the USDA has a wonderful site where you can just type in your zip code and it'll give you all of that information. It'll give you your last frost date, your first frost date, the length of your season, and what zone you're in. But pretty much across Maryland, we can all grow very similar things. The spacing, remember, it's okay to keep them a little tight, but if it says 18 inches and you're planting it 2 inches apart, you just caused a competition between them, and they're probably not going to do very well. And then my last, which isn't a fun advice, but I would always say just make sure you know what your pests are going to be. I can't tell you how many times people have excitedly sent me pictures of these ladybugs, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we have so many ladybugs in our garden." And then I have to be the bearer of bad news and be like, "Those are bean beetles, and you need to get rid of them. They're a pest." Or those are a type of stink bug. I'm sorry. Those are not a great thing to find in your garden. And there's so many apps and easy ways of identifying them. So just be mindful. If you know the plant, try to figure out what some of those pests are going to be. Starting seeds indoors. Oh my goodness, I have some people that get so excited. They already started them like 3 months ago. Don't. Like, don't be in a rush. Begin sowing your seeds. Most of our plants don't even need started for quite a long while. Tomatoes and peppers are about the first plants. If you do your onions from seed, you probably would have wanted to start those, but most people do theirs from sets. If you want to look at your light and temperature conditions, some people try to start them in their basement where it's really cold and they wonder why they're struggling. Plants really do thrive under warmth. You could do grow mats if you wanted to put it in a cooler spot because you don't have another spot. You could totally do that. And some of the lights do emit some heat, so that if it's not an LED, which most are anymore, it could produce a little bit of heat. The University of Maryland does have a great resource on everything from soil selection containers. And then I'll show you the next one. It's the timing sheet. This one works for my brain on helping me try to like set up on when to start versus, when my garden season is. And I think this is just a chunk of it. I'm pretty sure it has a couple extra plants on there, but I couldn't get the whole thing on here. But what's cool about this germination information sheet is even if you are not from here and maybe you're from somewhere else, this would still work for you because it does a good job of telling you your time to seed before the last frost date, which if you use the USDA chart and it told you, your first frost and your last frost, then you have an approximation of when that's going to be. The time the seed takes to germinate, most seeds are 5 to 10. Sometimes they can be really excited. Sometimes my lettuces and my radishes will pop up in a day or two. Sometimes my brassicas too. My broccoli sometimes comes up really quickly too. The temperature that they like to be at, and if you look at that, you notice that most of those temps are warm. My house is usually not 70 degrees. So if you have a nice warm house, you're going to be great. But a heat mat might be necessary. I've learned, especially with peppers, pepper seeds like to be really, really warm to germinate. So what I usually do is I use a heating mat for that. and that definitely helps. If you don't have a heating mat, one other thing I did was put it in a more southerly facing window just to heat the seeds up. Like I just put it in a wet paper towel and pre-sprouted the seeds because I didn't have a warm enough spot. And that really helped with getting, especially my seems like my hot peppers, like my cayenne really like to be a nice warm place. But just keep in mind, a lot of people think that they have a sunny enough window. Most of the time, you don't. I've never seen any plant be the healthiest that it can be in a window. It usually needs some sort of grow light. And if you think to yourself, like, I don't have the space for a grow light, that might be a good thing for you to think about. Well, if I only need two tomato plants, do I need to buy a heat mat, lights, a grow rack, and have all this for two tomato plants? Probably not. I get that we all like want to try to, but it probably isn't cost productive or it's productive for your brain. You're probably tired of trying to keep it alive by the time it's time to put it in the ground, or maybe it's leggy and you're frustrated. So that's your choice. But if you don't have a lot of plants, like you, it's okay to just get the seedling of it as long as you can find it. Here in Allegany County, a lot of our farmers markets have different plants for sale, and they have a lot of varieties. So that helps with people that don't want to start from seed. All right, so my other fun thing I always like people to be thinking about is even if you have a small spot, you could do some succession planting. I love succession planting because it allows me to grow more things in a smaller area and still have plenty to be able to share with my family and with other people. So it's just maximizing your space. There's a couple ways that you could do it. You could do it with the same plant. If you've ever planted lettuce before, if you plant all your lettuce seeds at one time, now you're going to need to like go adopt a couple rabbits or something because you have more lettuce than you know what to do with. And if you don't use it in the right amount of time, it doesn't always taste good or it'll start to bolt. So you can stagger those plantings by a couple weeks. So then as one group of the lettuce is great and you're harvesting it and it's delicious in your salads, the next ones aren't going to be ready till the next week. And then a week later, then the next one. So you can kind of stagger your planting. It does take some thought process ahead of time, but that's a really great way to make sure that you're utilizing it with your family instead of getting, a truck bed load of radishes. And now you're like, what are we going to do with these? If you staggered that planting, the first ones will be ready. And as they're fizzling out, you can get the next ones and the next ones. And then my other favorite way of succession gardening is more like this down here at the bottom. So, like, my garlic's been planted out in the garden since October, and I'm going to pull those around July here in Western Maryland. And then I could plant some cucumbers in their place, harvest my cucumbers throughout the summer, and then maybe I'm just going to worry about my soil health and plant some cover crop at the end of the season. So if you look at the different ones, it goes from like peas to squash to kale, with the dates obviously by it, lettuces to green beans to broccoli. So you're seeing it goes cool weather, warm weather, cool weather. And I just think that's so smart. The only thing is like, you might want to amend the bed between, add a little bit extra nutrients. That might help it a little bit. I mean, the radish one is four different things. I don't know if I could pull that off up here, but radishes, Asian greens, eggplants, and rye. Well, I'll be honest, I don't eat eggplants, so I don't grow eggplants here. And if you've ever dealt with flea beetles, eggplants are their favorite thing in the world. So that's another issue I have. So yeah, think about that succession planting. This is also from the same website that I posted before from you and me, and it just gets me thinking about, okay, I like green beans, but I also like radishes. Could I use the same space? I sure could. I'm just gonna have to stagger my planting a little bit. Kind of hit on this one a little bit. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but know your pests. And it's okay if you don't know your pests yet. If this is your first year gardening, that's absolutely fine. You'll figure it out. If they're chewing holes in your plants, that's a pest. And if usually there's a high population, that's usually a great sign that it's a pest too. There's all different kinds of things. IPM, that integrated pest management. I always go with the path of least resistance, which usually means I'm squishing bugs. I'm trying to remove them manually for the space that I have that works. But always be looking for, what's the least way of trying to get rid of them. Crop rotation is going to help because, you're not giving them the exact same food the pest had last year in the exact same spot. Companion planting, I have a love-hate relationship with that. There's not much scientific evidence on it, but I do recognize that some things are deterred, or, maybe they're just covering the ground. You can dive deep into companion planting, and some people are all for it. But I've literally had deer come up and eat the marigolds that they're not supposed to like. I even told them they weren't supposed to like it, but they ate it anyway, so it didn't really help. Attracting beneficial insects. I always try to incorporate some flowers into my vegetable garden just because, if you're giving them a place to come in, you're also giving a place for like these ladybugs and lacewings that are great predators. Proper watering practices. Last year was really hard because it was so dry. But if you set yourself up with a nice watering system now, it's going to make your life a lot easier. And if you're still in the planning process, remember you don't want to have to be carrying water like 10 miles to get to where you're going to water it. That's going to get really old, and chances are that's going to be an abandoned garden space in just a couple of weeks. And then always maintain that healthy soil. Healthy soil makes for healthy plants. And adding organic matter and maybe even covering the soil a little bit with a mulch is going to help keep that moisture in and also just keep the soil a little bit healthier. And then my favorite is, remember, you're not a superhero. It's okay to remember that it has been a minute since you have been in the garden. My body always reminds me that I have not lifted quite that much or moved that much in a long time. So don't forget to warm yourself up. And I was talking to my coworker, I was like, what else do we need to remember about warming up the garden? And she reminded me of this. And I was like, oh, yes, you're 100% right. We need to warm ourselves up. And I actually found from Mississippi State University some different stretches and some different lifting. This is a great time to kind of, get out and walk a little bit, bending over, stretching, picking up heavier things, especially if you've given yourself the winter off, like a lot of us do. You want to build that muscle because, our bodies really don't like to just be jolted back into doing really hard work and heavy lifting. So just practice, because we don't want your body to be aching and that be another hindrance and hard for you to continue gardening. I believe gardening is for everybody and every age person, but we all have to prepare ourselves in different ways. Even very young me had to make sure I stretched before I went out there. Um, and then lastly is remember your skin protection. Like a lot of times we forget when it's not super warm outside that the sun's rays are still a real thing. Make sure you're covering up. I've seen the cool gardening sleeves. I think those are really nice to have on hand. And it's just nice to be able to cover up your skin, but not, have on a sweatshirt and long sweatpants. It's whatever you're comfortable in. All right, I think that might be the last one. Yep. So best of luck on your gardening journey. I'm going to exit out of this, see what kind of questions that you had. Hopefully you got something out of this that was new or brought on a different thought or just has you thinking in a different way. Soil tested, South Baltimore. The University of Maryland Extension has an entire list of different places that you can get your soil tested. We don't do it, but and make sure oh yeah, so if you think there are contaminants in the soil, there are different soil tests that you can have that check for like leads, hard, I think metals, different things that could be a contaminant. I know I saw that on the one that I did through Penn State. But just keep in mind, your pH has to be really far off in order for your plants to pull up those nutrients. Like most of our heavy metals, like your pH has to be like a 2. If you know there's been bad things in that area, definitely get your soil tested though. Yeah, what gardening zone I'm in, definitely use there's all different kinds. I always like to go to the USDA one. I think it's USDA, but it has like the zip code in there because when you just look at the map, I can't tell from the map because the way that like the zones kind of go all over the place. So there's definitely some. I'll see if I can find that again. Say, yeah, raking leaves, I avoid it until I have to, unless I'm removing a diseased plant. Planting flowers, I think it believes on your the flowers that you're planting. Native plants kind of are cool with whatever you want to plant in them. If you're planting very specific to pH flowers, it might be in your best interest to get a pH a soil test. So look at the plants that you want to grow, see what they need to grow, and then you probably would want to test. I know with my native plants, they don't care. Like they're happy to just have a place to grow. Soil mixture that you'd recommend. For the raised beds, uh, the couple community gardens that I worked with, they have used a mixture of sifted topsoil and the mushroom, what's that called? Like mushroom compost, I think is what they call it. Yeah, they
Yep.
use like a mixture of the two, and it was beautifully grown. Uh, I don't even think they did it in proportions. It might have been about 50-50, but honestly, they just mixed it together and added it. It was wonderful. Oh yeah, the zip code, that's good. The almanac, that might have been it. It might have been the almanac instead of the USDA. Presentation's coming out. Scrap all the mulch leaves, or scrape them out. Mulch on top of it. So too much of anything, I was looking at the mulch question, could be bad. Burying mulch into your soil is going to really mess with your nitrogen. It's going to tie up nitrogen. I've seen that happen, and your plants almost look like they can't eat because basically they can't because your nitrogen's tied up and they can't pull it up through their roots. I've seen people put down a lot of mulch the year before, and then they're able to like break down over the winter. But I have mixed feelings on adding too much mulch. Too much of it can actually really mess with it. But I've seen other people plant right in mulch and it worked out for them. So if anybody else has thoughts on excessive mulch, you let me know. Sterile. Oh yeah, I've heard of people sterilizing their soil by putting it like running, I think like boiling water. I mean, obviously be careful doing that. I've even seen some people bake it. You would be eliminating a lot of the different things in there, but you would also be eliminating any of your fungal, bacterial, that good bacteria. So if it was that contaminated with disease, I would just get rid of that soil. I probably wouldn't use it. But yes, I've seen where people have done that. Turning the soil, that's one of those things that's, ugh, it's a personal preference. I broad fork my soil. Bigger ag, they they sometimes will, they have to use a turner of their soil. It doesn't need done. I mean, you can always aerate it. You could use a fork to aerate it. You could use a broad fork to aerate it. If it's a new spot, you might want to break the soil up by turning it because you're gonna have to get things out of there. That's really a personal preference. I do the no-till typically on my own garden, but I don't hold anything against people that want to till their garden. Just know that you are changing the structure of the soil. Let's see, pruning azaleas. Ooh, I don't know. I'm not any of the other two on here. Are you? I don't have azaleas, so I have not pruned them.
Definitely prune any of those bushes in the winter.
Yeah, I was
Um,
gonna say, I know some like to do it in the fall, but
you just want to make sure it's like a cooler time in the year. I don't know if azaleas put their buds out on fall wood,
yeah, I've
but
accidentally messed up with my hydrangeas before and ended up pruning
yeah.
off all of my actual flowers.
I mean, blueberries do that, but you still prune them in the
Yeah,
winter some because, you just want to have a more productive crop and you want to take out dead or old wood and make sure that you don't have too much crowding in the
yeah.
canopy.
You might lose a couple blooms because it does say the best time to cut them off is after they've budded. They make their buds in August, but cleaning out some of that is still going to be beneficial for the plant.
The harder you prune, the more new growth you get generally.
Yes. And while I did miss my hydrangeas the one year, then following year it was a much healthier plant and it needed it. So I considered it a necessity. Looks like other people have fun with their little groundhog friends.
Friends, that's a
Uh-huh.
generous term for
I,
them.
I use the word friends like my friends. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're just hard. They are adorable, but it's the wrong
They
place
eat
for
my
that.
research and that makes them
It's
persona
hard.
non grata.
Yeah. Yeah, I know at our house we've had a couple, but we were able to block off their holes and they don't show up anymore. That's been great. Should butterfly bushes be removed from pollinator gardens? I mean, they are non-native and invasive, so we don't ever recommend planting them, but we also recognize that they still sell them.
They're
So
pretty.
they they are pretty. I always explain it to kids that like it's like feeding our pollinators the wrong food. It's like, hey kids,
Cheetos.
you know what, guys, you can just have all of the junk food that you want 24 hours a day. You're not going to grow properly. It's not good for your stomachs. It's kind of the
Mm,
same. But
okay.
my grandma loved them, and if I would have told her to eliminate hers, she would have told me she didn't care what I thought. So, sometimes it's a plant you love, but yes, we would. Now temps in the morning occasionally below zero. You might still get some with your rain barrel with it freezing. I typically get mine cleaned out, and then in April is when I finally get mine up and running because I know that we're still going to have freezing temperatures here in Alleghany County. So I don't I don't tend to do that. Different corners of the house. Yeah, especially if you're watering, if you want to have your rain barrel in different locations. We have a plot across the road, and then we have a plot in our yard area. So we have two separate rain collections. One collects from the garden or from the garage, one collects from the house. So yeah, absolutely. You can have them in several places. Whatever works for you. For plants to feed a family. Oh, okay. I've seen this before. You guys have probably seen it. Is there a guide or a rule of thumb for the number of plants needed to feed a family of five? I can tell you that we need one cabbage plant for my entire family of three because we don't like cabbage. So my best advice would be plant what you're going to eat and look into how you're going to preserve it and look into how well it saves. So like we can't grow enough sweet potatoes and regular potatoes. We eat a lot of those in my house. So I will squeeze in a sweet potato wherever I can. I will add extra potatoes. Green beans are the same at my house, broccoli, but I need zero eggplant at my house. Like we are not going to eat that. I don't like it. While I've seen those, I feel like I want to be the family that would eat what the recommendations are, but I also recognize that every family is so different. And like culturally speaking, we're all different. A lot of times our food is tied to culture and we don't necessarily eat the same things. I want to eat all the lettuce I plant, but yeah, it's no good. Yeah, it's partially done compost and raised beds. It depends on how far your compost is composted. If it's now, it should have enough time to break down. I just wouldn't ever do partially done compost like right when you're planting. It's going to burn your plants, especially if it depends on what you put in your compost. My compost has a lot of like chicken manure and stuff from the bottom of the chicken bed, so I always make sure it breaks down all the way just to be on the safe side. Rainwater from a shingle roof. Yeah, there's thoughts about that, about whether or not it could potentially cause contamination. And my answer is it could. Absolutely, it could. I make sure I rinse off my plants or my food really well, regardless. I wash my plants from my garden just as well as I wash the plants from the grocery store when I bring them into my home. Yes, it could be a concern, but it's one of those things where you want to be mindful. If that's something that you're like, I'm not doing that, then that's on you. Oh, winter sowing, getting late for that, but I think you could still do some. I've seen some really great success stories with winter sowing and things in the brassica family. But then I've also seen some people pull off tomatoes. I don't think that would work here in Allegheny County. I think that by the time that tomato was being set, it would be the end of our season. But brassicas seem to do well in those. I don't know. I wouldn't do tomatoes or peppers in this part of the state. I don't think that they would have enough time to. I mean, with peppers up here, we barely have enough time starting them early to get them to produce a fruit. Grow bags. Oh, that's a good question. Will I need to rotate crops if I grew them in grow bags? Huh. I mean, I would think yes, because they could have gone down into that soil.
If
What do
you're
you think?
switching your soil, no, but if you're not switching your soil, yes.
Yeah, I was like, that's a
Yeah,
I
I
that's a
think.
really good question. Yeah, I wouldn't plant the same thing in the same soil. And I mean,
Especially if there was a disease in last year's plants, if there were tomatoes and they died back, I would toss
mhm.
that soil.
I agree.
The
Like my
easiest.
mom always reused hers from her
Or
flowers, and that was fine.
I
But
put it in my compost is what I do. And
yeah,
then it composts for about a year and then it turns back into soil.
yeah, and it's nice and airy for my compost. It needs a little bit of
Yep,
extra like airiness in there.
exactly. Yeah.
Spotted lanternflies. Here in Allegheny County, the first thing I tell people is like get rid of. the tree of heaven. Like they love it. If you have a large and dense population of those trees, they're gonna hang out there forever. Now they like a lot of different plants, but yeah, they really love the tree of heaven. And the only other thing I've really noticed that they're really, really hard on is obviously vineyards, grapes, and some fruit trees. I've not had a problem in my vegetable garden with lantern flies yet. Seed link in the chat. I'm not sure which one that one was. Indoor seed starting website. I think Emily already did that. It's superstar status there. Thank you. Incorporate the cover crops that are in my raised bed. I usually do that late April, and then sometimes in May. Sometimes I did cover crops in some of my raised bed. Oh my goodness, they were really, really hard to incorporate. Depends on what you grew in there. Obviously, like a crimson clover, no problem. Those are easy. I did oats once. Oh my gosh, they were so hard to get rid of and had such a great root structure. And I even had to like chop them, pulverize them. Like it took a lot to get them to get back.
With cover crops, I'll just mention this because we do a lot of cover crop work
I
down here
knew it.
for farmers. And if you're growing one of the grasses, oats, wheat, and especially rye, they will make a lot of biomass, but they will also make a lot of below ground root biomass, which can then be difficult for the next generation of your garden, and it will also tie up nitrogen, those grasses. So you will have to fertilize more. Um,
Mhm.
that said, long term, you're adding more carbon to your soil, so more organic matter, which ultimately makes for a healthy soil. So it's more of a long term improving the soil thing.
Yeah. And I feel like you could do a whole 2 hour plus session on cover crops. And
We
if
have done a short, yeah, like cover crops and composting, I think
yeah.
last year.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where, I think it's great that even the backyard gardeners are getting on board with it. I think it's wonderful.
Definitely.
But definitely all of them are not created the same. And I've even had my producers up here being like, I don't like those radishes. Like those radishes are the worst. They never die. And I'm like, huh, yeah, you're welcome. Um, enjoy your radishes. Is sprinkler in the morning a bad thing? I mean, it could be. At least you're doing it in the morning and it's given an opportunity to dry throughout the day. Water's better than no water. So while it's not the ideal solution, it still works. And if that's all you can do, I totally understand. But yeah, there's other better ideas, but I mean, everything comes with a cost. Like it costs money and costs time. Any pest identification sites or apps? We need an app. Do we have an app?
Um, I bet Emily might be the right person to put something in there, but you can always take a picture of things and send it into our Ask extension, and somebody should get back to you within like the week. We try to answer those really quickly.
That's awesome.
I'll put that website in here.
And someone linked a cool looking book on plant partners, companion planning, exercise website. That was the Michigan one. Someone up. Thank you. Emily did that. I just keep going down and I'll see that Emily already did that. So I just keep going. Oleas for irrigation. I think those are wonderful, especially for a raised bed or for a potted plant. I just saw some of those done earlier. I've never used them, but I can see where those would be amazing for a smaller area and keeping watered because you're watering the root structure, which is going to make it really happy. Marigolds and deer. I'm glad I'm not the only one. They literally walked over and chewed on it. They're the worst. What herbs can I plant to deter deer? If you find that out, I would love to know because my deer, it'll even say deer resistant, and they will walk over and just, I swear they read the tag and they're like, no, it's not. And they just like chew it. So I've never had anything. And you got to remember it has to do with the food available for your deer. And it also has to do with, is it the doe giving birth season? Because when baby deer are running around, they'll put anything in their mouth like a toddler. They don't care. So I've even had them walk up and chew on milkweed. Like, you're not supposed to want to chew on milkweed, and it did. I know I can't grow a hosta ever. because they love them at my house.
That's true. Yeah,
Like,
the hostas and lilies, good luck.
yeah, oh my gosh, lilies. They love my lilies.
You need a
They wait
7 foot tall fence
they
if you
wait
want to
till it's
grow those
almost
things.
bloomed. I'm like, oh, it's gonna bloom. Watch, it's gonna. And like that night, they're like, no, we're gonna eat it.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-mm.
Those are, yeah, they're
Waking up
bad.
our body too. Yeah, don't forget that. Like we are definitely not indestructible. Scheduling for staggered crops. There was that one with, yep, you already got that. I don't even have to do this. Yeah, I have a really hard time with legginess in any windows. I've not come across a perfect window yet. I've seen some people that theirs look better than mine, but I've never seen any that the light is low enough and they're getting enough direct sunlight. But if you have that working for you, and that's awesome. Good for you. Like I cannot. Red
Have you
clover,
ever
you
have
go
you
ahead.
ever heard this statistic? I think I've heard that you only get 10% of the light that's outdoors in through a window.
I
So,
believe that.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like even my indoor plants, they really need more light than they get. And they tell me through their looks too. So I'm thinking soil mixture, we talked about that. Winter sowing, talked about that. Yes. Do I need to age chicken manure before using it in the vegetables? Yes. Yeah, that's a hot manure. It definitely needs to be cooled off.
Needs
Um,
to be heated to 140 plus degrees
yes.
internal temperature.
Yeah, which is really hard to do in a backyard compost or a
Yeah.
composting bin. It
Yeah.
can be done. You're gonna have to put in some work to pull that off and have a large bin. Mine's like 3 foot by 3 feet. It has to be. That's the last thing. Cover it up. Keep the moisture content. Put the thermometer in there, and whew,
Yeah, that's why I don't do any
no.
manures in my, well, I don't have chickens either, but yeah.
Yeah, I understand. Squash bugs, removing them. That's good. It sounds like they did everything they could, but they come back in the spring and summer. I agree. Like they are really hard to deter. I've started to grow a lot more of my winter squash because they are so much more resilient to the squash bugs. So I try to grow those harder stems. They just seem to be able to resist all of that a little bit better. Like zucchini is really hard for me because I get every squash bug in the neighborhood. And then cover crops. Do you offer any canning and preserving classes? Oh, Emily already answered. Yeah, we have extension people for that, but we don't do that. But there are some great places that you can do that.
And I put the link to our home preservation website. They do all these classes. They move around the state to teach these, but it's on their website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't give too much information because, we want everybody to be nice and healthy and there's so much out there that is not up to date because like all things it changes over time, so you have to be mindful of that. Oh, the snail method for seed starting, that is something new. Have you guys seen much of that so far? It's where it's just like a piece of like I think it's like a bubble wrap kind of stuff. And then you put the soil on it and then you roll it up and then plant the seeds in the top and then it takes up less space. I did it last year. It's hard to water, but it did produce some nice looking tomatoes. I think we need to do more on like the science behind it of how well it really works because this is like straight off of Instagram. But I saw it, I thought it was interesting. I gave it a try. Oh yeah, you do need to have a spray schedule for peach trees. Oh, Emily got him. Thank you, Emily. Man, Emily's in here.
Yeah,
I'm like,
she's quiet, but she's behind the scenes running the show.
I just see her like fevers typing. I can see that. She's netting for the deer. Fencing is the only way I can 100% prevent deer and tall fencing. Like, honestly, the taller the better.
Yeah.
5 feet they can jump. I found that out, especially if they really want what's in there. Right. Oh, thank you, Emily. She even put my teaching effective survey in there. Oh, and they completed it. You're magnificent. Deer don't touch their hostas. I've seen where people have used like the egg, garlic, hot pepper mix. The only tricky part with that is it's just reapplication and every time it would rain, but that could work. Oh, this is interesting. My lavender plants are dying for no obvious reason. Is there an expiration date on the plants? Yeah, plants have a life
No, lavender lives forever.
ever. I was
It's
gonna say some
prob
plants do have like an expiration, but lavender's,
lavender, but it's Mediterranean. So my guess is it's a soil it's too wet usually when lavender dies.
oh
I
yeah, they don't
can't
want anything.
grow
They're
it in sand here. We get a lot more rain than they get in the Mediterranean, and we get it in the summer when
Ooh, you aren't kidding. Lavender can live up to 24 years.
yeah.
So I don't think it met its end of life.
I
I see
think
something.
my Ginny, our master gardener coordinator down here, says she's had some for like 40 years or something crazy.
If they're in a happy spot, they seem like they're good to
Full
go.
sun.
And just remember, like every county has a home lord and an ag person, and we take messages and questions all the time. And even if you don't hear back from us the same day, you'll get an answer. And then, we also have Ask Extension, and that's another great place. There's so many resources. We had a lot of snow this winter too, so maybe that was part of the reason they had an issue with their lavender.
Also, we're on the depending on where you're at, I think we're at one of the most northernly places where lavender overwinters, or like some of these types of lavender, I think like French lavender doesn't usually make it here, but English lavender does. I can't remember. I'm not a home hort person, but
Yeah.
some types don't overwinter here.
English does a good job here, but it's only because it's up against the building too. Like we have a stone building here, and
Okay,
it
so
does a
it's
great
getting
job of keeping it nice and warm.
yeah, thank you all for coming. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks for It's Gardening 101. So that is really meant for beginner gardeners. If you've been gardening for years, you can still come to that, but it might be a little basic for you. And then in 4 weeks, we're going to have unique herbs and how to use them. That one should be a lot of fun. We like to do herbs and introduce new things that people haven't tried before. So, all right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.